As an Asian dude living here in the UK, it's fair to say that I experience life pretty differently to the average Brit. And if you don't know what a third culture kid is, it's basically someone who's grown up in a different culture to their parents, or they've been influenced or raised in a culture that's different to their origin, their ethnic origin. Basically someone who's never grown up in one singular dominant culture. They've always been exposed to many different ones. Ethnically, I'm fully Indonesian, and people like me aren't that common here in the northeast of England. Now, I'm not saying being a third culture kid is always bad, it's a negative thing. Like, I'm not putting myself in a victimized state. But sometimes third culture kids can always feel like, oh yeah, I'm different, that's a good thing, I should embrace it. But then other times they feel like,
I'm so lonely, people are different to me, like, people don't really understand what my culture is like.
So with this completely made up list based on my observations, I'm gonna give you 10 things that third culture kids only experience. Let's go. So first and foremost, the number one thing that third culture kids will always experience without fail is when people ask you, where are you from? And then when people ask you that, you kind of don't know how to answer it. Like, do they mean like what city you live in? Do they mean where's my ethnic origin from? Or like, do they mean like where I was born? But most of the time when people ask you that, they don't mean the city you live in. They usually mean like your ethnic origin. Oh yeah, I'm from Newcastle. Oh, okay, but no, I meant where are you really from? And I won't sugarcoat this, but when people do ask you that, deep down, like you do feel pretty irritated. Because it's just like you feel obliged to answer the city you live in because that's the environment, that's the area you were raised in, where you grew up. So you feel like you just belong in that culture more than your ethnic origin in some cases. Second thing about being a third culture kid is switching languages mid-sentence at home. I can guarantee you, if you go to any of your friends' houses who are third culture kids, if you overhear their conversations between them and their parents or their siblings, it's just going to be ending up them switching between English and their mother tongue, their native language. And I can imagine for some people that might be an odd experience, but for me, like, that's quite normal. And in my case specifically, when I'm talking to my parents, my siblings, like, I'll be switching between English and Indonesian mid-sentence. Being used to social groups where everyone is different to you. And this one really speaks to me personally because, like I said, Indonesians aren't that common in the northeast of England. I remember back at school or when I was at uni that most of my social groups would just be like either normal English people or just like people from other ethnic groups or cultures. And I'll be honest, it can suck sometimes when everyone in your social group doesn't have the same cultures or background as you. You can't share the same experiences together. But then eventually you just embrace that, and then you kind of feel lucky that you're exposed to all these different types of people, and then you just see the positive side in it. Inevitably having to conform to the dominant culture you live in. I already briefly mentioned this in the last one, but in more specific detail, this means that we kind of just have to fit into whatever culture we live in, whatever the place or country you live in, because nobody else shares the same background with you, so you just feel like you just have no other choices and you kind of have to fit into that dominant culture of the place you live in. And sometimes you may feel like you're kind of losing your culture because you're surrounded by nobody else who's like you. I mean, it really is inevitable because whatever society you live in, whatever country or city you live in, you just have to fit into that society and the politics in that country or city. So to be able to fit in as a citizen there, you just have to inevitably fit into that dominant culture. Being used to maintaining long distance relationships. And this doesn't necessarily mean romantic relationships. It could mean friendships with family members. You kind of just get used to having to call or text your loved ones at a specific time of where you live that fits in with the time of where they live to match the time zones. And I won't lie, this can get kind of difficult because then it just screws up your whole schedule and like the way you live. You have to talk to them in their time zone. It just becomes a massive faff. But if you really devote yourself with like whoever you talk to, your loved ones or whoever, then it just feels like second nature to you eventually. And it always just ends up getting to the point where on your clocks app, you always have the time zones of different countries of the world. So for me, I've got 2 time zones set on my phone. I've got one for West Indonesian time, and I've got one for East Australian time for my cousin who lives in Melbourne. At least there are actually more Indonesians living in Australia, so my cousin has this whole third culture kid game easier for her. Number 6, it's hard to fully identify with our identity. I'm sure us third culture kids, at some point in our lives, we've always questioned ourselves like, where do I actually truly belong? And then we end up questioning ourselves like, do I fit in with the city I live in, or would I fit in more with the country I ethnically originate from? But then eventually we kind of just accept that we can't change this. This is the way we lived, this is the way we were raised. And then we kind of see it in a positive way because we're like citizens of the world almost, because we feel like we're more open-minded to accept and experience other cultures. We know what other cultures are like in other parts of the world, so we really are kind of like citizens of the world. Visiting your home country can be a massive culture shock, and I feel like this impacts people more who come from Eastern Asian cultures and were raised in the West like me. But whenever you visit, you kind of just feel like you're definitely different from the rest of the people there, the rest of the citizens there, and then everyone can sense that you're different as well. Just the feeling of being so used to the way of life and culture of the city you live in or the country you live in, and then being suddenly back into the country where you ethnically originally come from. It kind of just makes you think, wow, if I didn't move away, like, this would have been me. I would have just been like these normal citizens. Like, I wouldn't be so westernized like I am now. And I wouldn't be speaking English the way I do now. But then eventually when you get to see your family members and experience a culture, it makes you appreciate it more. And you kind of appreciate that you come from a multicultural background and you get to experience all kinds of culture rather than just one. Becoming a master of currency converting. This one is totally dependent on like the amount of countries you grew up in, the amount of cultures you were exposed to. But the more currencies you can convert, then it makes you such a valuable asset to loads of people when you're traveling. So then you kind of just know instantly, just from the top of your head, like how much a British pound is worth in euros or in yen or whatever country you go to. Do I need to say any more? This one's pretty self-explanatory. Number 9, you can fit into multiple cultural celebrations. Being a part of multiple cultures and communities means that you can fit into literally any kind of cultural celebration. So in my case, I'd be off celebrating Ramadan with my family or my other Indonesian friends, but then when it's Christmas time, I can just go and celebrate a Christmas party with all my white friends, and it'll be cool. And the best part about going to all these different cultural parties is free food. And the 10th and final thing that third culture kids will always experience, without fail, is having to tell everyone your backstory. Out of everything on this list, this is probably the most tedious and annoying one that third culture kids will experience. Literally in any event, any social situation, any context, whenever you meet someone, in every conversation with someone new you just met, you always feel like you have to explain your backstory to them, like where you're born, where your parents are from, what city you live in, what's your ethnic origin, if you're half race, if you're this or that. It just gets really tedious and you just feel like, you just get to the point where you're just like, look, here's my card with my backstory, give it a read because I can't be bothered to tell this for the 1,000,000th time. And that has been 10 things that only third culture kids will experience in life. But if you did agree or disagree with some of the stuff on this list, or if you feel like I missed anything out about third culture kids, then just drop them in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video though, then give it a thumbs up and also hit that subscribe button below. Alright guys, thank you for watching. Until next time, I'm out. Have a good one.